The first time I heard my son being called broken, it was during a parent-teacher conference that still echoes in my mind like a slow, cruel whisper. Mrs. Langford was the kind of woman who spoke as if every word were a performance. Polished smile, perfect posture, pearls that gleamed under the fluorescent lights. She didn't mean to sound cruel, at least that's what she said, but she leaned across the table, fingers folded neatly, and told me, Evan's mind doesn't work the way other children's do. He's broken. Broken. The word hung between us. I remember glancing at my son through the window in the hallway. He was sitting cross-legged on the floor, drawing intricate little patterns on his notebook. Circles inside squares, with tiny lines connecting each corner like a maze. He looked calm, content, unaware that someone had just defined him with a word that shattered me. I wanted to shout, to defend him, but instead, I just nodded and said, "He's not broken. He's just quiet." Mrs. Langford smiled the way some people do when they think they know better. "Quiet, yes," she said. "But one day, Mrs. Wells, the world won't wait for quiet." That night, I watched Evan build something with his old Lego set, a small city with towers that connected by narrow bridges. He moved the pieces around silently, focused, deliberate. When I asked what he was making, he said, "A place where people can go anywhere without getting lost." I didn't realize it then, but those bridges would become a symbol for everything that came next. How my son, labeled broken by his teacher, would one day solve a problem that even her powerful lawyer husband couldn't. And when he did, it wouldn't just change how she saw him. It would change how the whole town did. Because sometimes the quiet ones aren't broken at all. They're just building bridges no one else can see. True strength, I learned, isn't in how loudly we fight back. It's in how deeply we understand. Evan was 10 when all this happened. 10, small for his age, with that serious look children sometimes wear when their thoughts live far ahead of their years. He had sandy brown hair that never stayed combed, and a habit of keeping one hand tucked in his hoodie pocket when he was nervous. After that meeting with Mrs. Langford, I walked home clutching his backpack like it was made of glass. Our house was modest but warm, yellow curtains, a crooked bookshelf, and a kitchen that always smelled faintly of cinnamon because Evan loved cinnamon toast. It wasn't much, but it was ours. I'd been raising him alone since my husband passed away 3 years earlier. There were bills stacked on the counter, but we were doing all right. At least, that's what I told myself. Evan's world was small. School, home, the library, and I worried sometimes that he didn't have enough friends. He didn't speak much, but when he did, his words carried weight, like he had measured each one before letting it go. A week after the conference, Mrs. Langford started assigning group challenges, little logic puzzles meant to teach teamwork. Evan always solved them, quietly, often before anyone else had even started. But he never explained how he got the answers. That frustrated her. One afternoon, she sent a note home. Evan refuses to participate. He isolates himself. Please encourage him to cooperate. That night at dinner, I asked him why. He stared at his plate, tracing a breadcrumb across the table. "She doesn't like when I see things differently," he said simply. I tried to smile, but something inside me twisted. I didn't want my son to believe there was something wrong with how his mind worked. The following week, Mrs. Langford announced that her husband, a local attorney, would visit the class to teach them about real-world problem-solving. Evan barely looked up, but something in his eyes flickered, the way it does when he's quietly piecing something together. I didn't know then that this man, this confident lawyer, would walk straight into a problem only my son could untangle. Sometimes, the quietest minds are already solving storms no one else has seen coming. When Mr. Langford arrived at the school, the air shifted. Even the other teachers seemed a little on edge. He was tall, polished like his wife, and carried himself with the kind of confidence that made everyone else straighten up a little. He introduced himself as Robert Langford, partner at Langford and Pike Attorneys, and flashed a rehearsed smile as he clapped his hands together. He told the class they'd be doing a mock case, a fun activity, he said, where students would act as lawyers and jurors to solve a fictional dispute. Mrs. Langford stood at the back, watching like a proud director. The case was about a lost heirloom, an old pocket watch that had been misplaced, with clues hidden in witness statements and diagrams. Robert explained the rules. Each group had to read the evidence, identify inconsistencies, and present their theory. The room buzzed with chatter, pencils scraping, papers flipping. Evan sat quietly, scanning the pages. His partner, a talkative boy named Henry, kept trying to get him involved. "Come on, Evan, what do you think?" Evan finally pointed at a line on the worksheet. "This doesn't make sense," he murmured. The witness said the watch was ticking, but the timeline shows the battery had already died. Henry frowned. "So what?" Evan tilted his head. "So, the story can't be true." By the end of class, when the groups presented, most of them had missed that detail. But Evan's group didn't. Mr. Langford looked up from their notes, brow furrowing. "Interesting catch," he said slowly. "How did you notice that?" Evan shrugged. "It didn't fit. I just wanted it to make sense." For the first time, Robert Langford looked at my son not as a child, but as a mind. Something in his expression shifted. Later that day, he stopped me outside the classroom. "Your boy," he said thoughtfully, "he sees patterns most people miss." Then, almost to himself, "I could use that kind of thinking right now." I didn't know what he meant then. But that was the day a quiet 10-year-old boy was unknowingly handed the first thread of a much larger mystery. Life has a strange way of testing gifts we don't yet understand. 2 days later, Mr. Langford showed up again, this time without the polished speech or the perfect smile. His tie was loose, and there were tired lines around his eyes. Mrs. Langford looked surprised to see him during school hours, but he waved her off and asked if he could borrow Evan for a brief educational exercise. I got the call from the principal's office, who assured me it was just a harmless learning opportunity. Still, something in my stomach nodded. When Evan came home that afternoon, his cheeks were flushed in that way they get when he's been thinking hard. "Mom," he said, dropping his backpack by the door, "Mr. Langford showed me his problem." "What kind of problem?" I asked. He hesitated, then pulled a crumpled sheet of paper from his hoodie pocket. It was covered in numbers, diagrams, and handwritten notes that looked nothing like schoolwork. "He said it was about a lawsuit," Evan said. "He can't find what's missing." My breath caught. "A lawsuit?" Evan nodded. "It's about money. But I think someone made a mistake in the numbers. See?" He pointed to a small table of figures. "Here. They forgot to carry a decimal. That's why it looks like the money disappeared." I stared at the paper, half understanding, half in disbelief. "Evan, did he ask you to look at this?" He said I could try, just for fun. It turned out Robert Langford was handling a high-profile property case, something about disputed land values and missing funds between two business partners. He'd been working on it for weeks and couldn't locate the accounting inconsistency that made his client look guilty. That night, Evan sat at the kitchen table, chewing on a pencil, studying those documents like they were another puzzle. He lined up pages, cross-referenced columns, and mumbled to himself. I watched him, torn between worry and awe. At one point, he looked up and said softly, "It's like Mrs. Langford's class puzzle, Mom. Just bigger. The clues don't add up, but if you listen, the numbers tell you what's wrong." He smiled faintly and went back to work, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Sometimes, a child's way of seeing the world isn't simple, it's sacred. By Friday evening, I found Evan asleep at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers and pencil shavings. His head rested on his folded arms, and a half-finished glass of milk sat beside him. I started gathering the documents to tidy up, but then I froze. Across one of the pages, in Evan's careful block handwriting, were 3 words. "He's been lying." My heart thudded. The sheet showed a list of property values and transactions, with arrows connecting some, circles around others. He had written notes like duplicated entry and false signature, things no 10-year-old should even know how to spot. The next morning, Robert Langford knocked on our door. He looked exhausted but hopeful, holding a folder against his chest. "I'm sorry for dropping this on Evan," he said as soon as I opened the door. He asked to see more, and honestly, I was curious what he'd find. He stepped inside, scanning the kitchen table like it was an altar of revelation. When he saw Evan's notes, his face changed. This is it, he whispered. This explains the discrepancy. Evan came out from his room, rubbing his eyes. You are looking in the wrong column, he said softly. The other lawyer used a copy of the same document, but changed one number. It's not a loss, it's a trick. Robert stared at him, speechless. Then, slowly, his expression crumbled into something between disbelief and admiration. You just saved my case, he murmured. Do you have any idea what you've done? Evan just shrugged. I wanted it to make sense. When he left, Robert promised he'd set things right. Mrs. Langford didn't come that Monday. Word spread quietly among the teachers that her husband's case, once thought unwinnable, had suddenly turned around thanks to an unexpected source. That night, as Evan built one of his Lego bridges again, he said, almost to himself, people hide things when they're scared. But if you look closely, the truth still connects. I watched him click the last two pieces together. The bridge was complete, and I realized the truth wasn't just in his puzzle, it was in how he saw the world. Sometimes, revelation arrives not as thunder, but as a whisper from a child's quiet brilliance. The following week, the calm began to crack. At first, Robert Langford was gracious. He sent a thank you note, signed in his firm's letterhead, expressing deep gratitude for Evan's extraordinary analytical insight. But a few days later, a storm began brewing quietly in the teacher's lounge. Mrs. Langford was no longer smiling. She cornered me after school one afternoon, her tone clipped, her pearls glinting under the fluorescent lights. I heard your son has been involved in my husband's work, she said. I don't think that's appropriate. I kept my voice even. He just noticed something your husband missed. That's all. Her nostrils flared. My husband's reputation is built on precision, Mrs. Wells. I don't appreciate a child being used as a publicity tool. I blinked. He wasn't used. He helped. Her eyes narrowed. You don't understand. The opposing attorney filed a motion to delay proceedings. They're claiming evidence tampering because someone outside the firm handled those documents. That night, the phone rang. It was Robert. His voice was tight, hurried. I made a mistake, he said. I shouldn't have brought Evan into it. The other side found out about the notes, about the corrections. They're trying to invalidate the evidence. I need to fix this. He paused, lowering his voice. But Evan was right. That's what kills me. He was right. When I told Evan, he looked calm as always. He didn't seem frightened, just thoughtful. She's mad because I made him look bad, he said softly. But he's not bad. He just didn't see. I wanted to protect him, to tell him that grown-up problems weren't his to carry, but the truth was already out. The next morning, the principal called me in. There were concerns, she said. Questions about boundaries. Evan sat outside the office, doodling in his notebook, quietly tracing another bridge. I realized he wasn't drawing random lines. He was mapping relationships, names, arrows, consequences. It was his way of making sense of chaos. I knew then that this wasn't just about a lawsuit anymore. It was about integrity, about whether the adults around him would honor truth or bury it to save face. Integrity is tested most when the truth becomes inconvenient. By the time the court hearing arrived, tension hung over our small town like a storm that refused to break. Mrs. Langford hadn't spoken to me since that hallway encounter. At school, she avoided Evan completely. No praise, no acknowledgement, just cold silence. He didn't seem to mind, but I did. That morning, as I was packing his lunch, Robert called again. I know I've put you both in a difficult spot, he said. But I need you to come to the courthouse today. Just to be there. I hesitated. Why? He took a breath. Because your son's discovery is about to decide the outcome of this case. And I think people should know the truth, wherever it came from. When we arrived, the courtroom was buzzing with quiet anticipation. Lawyers shuffled papers. Clients whispered anxiously. I caught a glimpse of Mrs. Langford sitting stiffly in the back row, her hands clasped tight on her purse. Robert stood to speak. He explained the case, a property dispute where one partner accused the other of siphoning funds. He detailed the missing decimal point, the false copy of the financial report, and how a young mind had spotted the error. At that moment, every eye in the room turned toward Evan. He sat beside me, small and steady, legs swinging above the courtroom floor. The opposing attorney rose, smirking. Are we seriously suggesting that a child uncovered evidence in a case of this magnitude? Robert didn't flinch. We're suggesting that truth doesn't require a title, only an honest eye. A hush fell over the room. He laid down Evan's annotated page as evidence. Every circle, arrow, and note was there, clear and irrefutable. The judge examined it quietly, then looked up. Remarkable, she said. Sometimes it takes a fresh perspective to see what others overlook. When the verdict came, Robert's client was cleared. The opposing counsel's manipulation was exposed, and the courtroom erupted with murmurs. As we left, Mrs. Langford approached us in the hallway. Her expression was unreadable. She opened her mouth to speak, but Evan, without looking up, simply said, "It made sense now." She froze, then lowered her eyes. The truth doesn't humiliate, it humbles. That night, the house was quiet except for the soft tick of the kitchen clock. I was washing dishes when there was a gentle knock at the door. It was Mrs. Langford. She wasn't wearing her pearls this time. Her hair was slightly unkempt, and she looked smaller somehow, like the world had finally pressed against her carefully built walls. "May I come in?" she asked softly. I hesitated, then nodded. She stepped inside, glancing around at the simple warmth of our kitchen, the drawings on the fridge, the half-finished Lego bridge on the counter. Her eyes lingered there. "I owe you an apology," she said finally. "To you and to Evan. I said things I shouldn't have. About him being—" She stopped herself. "About him not fitting the mold. I didn't say anything," she continued, her voice trembling slightly. "Robert told me everything. About how your son saw what no one else could. He said it wasn't luck, he said it was clarity." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small envelope. "This isn't much," she said, "but it's a scholarship. For a summer program in analytical sciences. It's not public yet. I wanted to offer it quietly, just between us." Evan walked in just then, rubbing sleep from his eyes. She knelt slightly to his height. "Evan," she said, "I misjudged you. I was too focused on how things should look, and I forgot what they could mean. You're not broken. You're extraordinary." He studied her face for a moment, then said, "Everyone just sees different parts of the picture." She blinked, tears forming, then smiled through them. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, they do." When she left, Evan turned to me and said, "She understands now." And he was right. In the weeks that followed, word about what happened spread quietly. Parents who had whispered about the quiet boy began to greet him differently. Teachers sought his help on math problems. Even Robert visited once, dropping off a framed photo of that Lego bridge Evan had finished, the one he said symbolized connection. Underneath it, he'd engraved 6 simple words. He built bridges no one else could. Sometimes, the truest legacy isn't brilliance, it's healing the distance between hearts. The following spring, the air smelled of rain and beginnings. Evan had outgrown his old hoodie, but he still carried that same quiet calm, like someone who saw the world as a series of gentle puzzles waiting to be understood. One afternoon, I watched him sitting on the porch, sketching bridges again. Different ones this time. Arches, cables, even one with tiny annotations about support balance and load tension. He looked up and smiled. "Mom," he said, "bridges are only strong if both sides want to meet." I just nodded because somehow he always found the truth in the simplest words. A week later, we attended an assembly at his school. Mrs. Langford stood at the podium, her voice steady but warm. She introduced a new student award for insight and integrity in problem solving. She didn't name it after him, but when she handed the first certificate to Evan, everyone understood. The applause that followed wasn't loud or wild. It was soft, full, human. It carried a kind of respect that no test score could ever earn. Afterward, she came over, her eyes shining. "He taught me something," she said quietly. "That learning isn't about control. It's about listening." I thanked her, and for the first time, it felt like peace had replaced the space where pride once lived. That night, I tucked the certificate into a frame beside the photo Robert had given us, the one with the engraved line. He built bridges no one else could. Evan didn't seem interested in trophies or praise. He just smiled, looking out the window at the streetlights reflecting on the wet pavement. "Mom," he whispered, "do you think everyone has a bridge they're supposed to build?" I thought about the teacher who learned humility, the lawyer who found redemption, and the boy who taught us all to see. "Yes," I said softly. "And maybe some people's bridges are invisible until they change the world." He nodded, satisfied, and went back to his sketching. The world had called him broken once, but I knew better now. He wasn't broken. He was the bridge itself, quiet, steady, and stronger than anyone had dared to imagine. Because kindness and truth, when they meet halfway, can hold the weight of the world.